Iran was very carefully choreographed, and it was very carefully telegraphed. Not only did Israel have hours' notice on the launch of these drones, as you know, we were talking about this 4 and 5 hours ahead of time, but they had a good week's notice from Iran in a general sense, knowing that a retaliation was in the offing. This was said to be, in concept, an eye for an eye, but of course, Iran did more than that. And this is significant to think that if some of these missiles and rockets did get through, we could be talking about hundreds of Israeli deaths today. And the fact that we are not brings us to a different point in this conversation. The White House is hoping that this might be the end of it.
It's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? Such fine calibration of this attack, and as you say, we had been bracing for this for over a week, and at the same time, closer than ever to a broader regional conflict. And I do wonder, the way that things stand now, with no further developments, does it allow both sides perhaps to claim a degree of victory here?
They might, although it does seem that Israel is determined to do something at this point. And as far as what happens at home, there is a very important political ramification here as the House of Representatives potentially prepares a vote on funding for Israel. It may be tied with funding for Ukraine. Both of these are very controversial with their respective sides of the aisle here. Progressive Democrats are very concerned about sending more money and materiel, weapons to Israel, while many conservative Republicans do not favor, at least those aligned with Donald Trump, sending money to Ukraine. So if these are in fact bound together here and see a vote next week, it is absolutely unclear if there is a path for it to succeed.
Bloomberg Balance of Power anchor Joe Matthew there with the latest. Let's get some more insights now from Amin Saikal, who's the Adjunct Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, joining us. Amin, really great to have you with us. I suppose I'll start off with the question that everyone is asking. Do you expect a retaliation from Israel? And if so, what does that look like, given we've just spoken about the fine calibration and choreography of what we saw from Iranian soil?
Well, there's no question that the Iranian response was to Israeli bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus last week or the week before, and therefore I think it was a measured response on the part of the Iranians. They really didn't want to get into a war with Israel, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has been vowing for a long time to do whatever Israel can do in order to prevent Iran from producing nuclear weapons, and he had vehemently opposed the July 2015 Iran nuclear agreement, and he had called on the Biden administration since the start of that administration not to negotiate with Iran, and he had also vowed that if necessary, Israel will act on its own in order to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. So now Prime Minister Netanyahu does have a pretext in order to attack Iran. So a retaliation on the part of Israel is not out of the question at this point.
What are the chances to you of this spiraling into a broader regional conflict that so many fear?
Well, I think it can easily spiral into a much larger conflict simply because that Iran and or the Islamic Republic of Iran and Israel have been arch enemies for a long time. And of course, the United States has always been on the side of Israel and has been committed to the security of the state of Israel. So if even President Biden may not be in favor of war in the Middle East, and of course he has said this in the past, but if Israel does carry a retaliatory attack, then Iranians will respond, and the United States will be dragged into the war in support of Israel, and Iran will definitely receive a lot of support from Russia and also possibly from China. And as a result of that, I think that the situation could really spiral out of control, and we may really face, as the UN Secretary General has said, a devastating conflict which could take a really global dimension and therefore affect not only the region but its consequences affecting the globe as a whole.
Can you give us a sense of the significance of the weekend strike in terms of reaching that sort of point? If you compare to where we were, say, on Friday or last week, before these strikes really started to gain international attention, or the risk of them, how much closer are we at this point in time?
Well, we are very close if the Israeli leadership decides to retaliate. And then the Iranians have made it absolutely clear that they will respond to that, and their response will be harsher. But at the same time, I think both sides have also reached a point to restore deterrence between them, in the sense that the Israelis have claimed that they've shot down 99% of those Iranian missiles and drones and so on, although it must be really said that it was not just Israel shooting down all those drones and missiles. It was really with extensive help of the United States, Britain, and of course France, and Jordan also played an important role. And as your reporter said, it was choreographed and related to the Israelis over a week, and therefore Israelis and their allies had been really prepared for this. But if it was an attack which had not been announced before, and the Israelis didn't know anything about it, then I think the casualties would have been higher, and indeed also the impact would have been higher. And that also very much indicates that Iran really does not want to get into a war with Israel, and of course the United States also playing an important role. But at the same time, it seems that we are on the brink, and as the UN Secretary General has said, I think it's important that all sides pull back and to try to avoid a devastating war, which could really lay the foundations for a World War III. And of course, Vladimir Putin has said this a number of times, and therefore Russia would definitely come to the aid of the Iranians, as Iran has provided assistance to Russia in its operations in Ukraine.
In the event that we do see any sort of Israeli retaliation, what would be the targets of that as well, do you think?
Well, definitely, I think Israelis would target the Iranian nuclear sites and also major military bases. And but the other target would be, of course, the Iranian oil resources, and that could have a really global impact on the economy across the world. And therefore, I think this is the sort of thing which has to be really avoided. I mean, Iran also has an important nuclear program. We know for a fact that Iranian uranium enrichment has reached something like 60%, and it may have been really higher. Of course, Iran sooner or later would be in a position to produce nuclear weapons, and of course this is what is the major concern of Israel, as well as some of its allies, the United States in particular. Israel wants to be the only nuclear power in the region, and therefore have this age of supremacy in the region, and that's one of the other reasons that Israel will be very keen to find the opportunity to act against the Iranian nuclear installations and facilities. But of course, that could also result in a major war, whether that nobody at the end may be able to control it, either militarily or diplomatically.
Prior to this, of course, the US did ask China to ask Tehran not to retaliate. They also asked the same of the likes of Turkey and Saudi Arabia. I do wonder, when it comes to the dimension of China's involvement, potentially Russia as well. Beijing's calling for restraint, but at what point would you see further involvement from these parties?
Well, China has a 25-year strategic agreement with Iran, which was signed in 2021, I believe. And certainly China is heavily involved in the infrastructural development of Iran, industrial development of the country, as well as there is very strong intelligence and military cooperation between the two sides. Of course, the Chinese wouldn't want to really get into war, but at the same time, if there is the wider conflict between Israel and Iran, then China will be on the side of the Iranians. Whether China will, get militarily involved, I think that remains to be seen. But at the same time, it will provide an opportunity for China to establish its position as a world power, and therefore vis-a-vis the United States and its allies.
How much bandwidth do you think there is for President Biden for the US to continue to support Israel, as they will continue to do? But of course, there does seem to be broader limitations on what that looks like, given President Biden is already struggling to maintain popular support when it comes to the conflict in Gaza.
I think there's a limit to the amount of support that the United States can provide to Israel. Of course, the Biden administration is very much concerned that it is an election year, and therefore he must do whatever really possible in order to win the elections. But at the same time, he's opposed by Donald Trump, who has declared his 100% support for Israel. President Biden doesn't want to be upstaged by Donald Trump at this point. But let's not forget that the United States cannot be a source of unlimited supply of financial, economic, and military aid to Israel, because it's not just that Israel has become isolated internationally as a result of the carnages that is really created in Gaza, but also the United States has been widely implicated in the Israeli actions. And this is not a reputation that the United States would like to really have internationally. And therefore, the Biden administration will have to be very, very careful to weigh all the options before it can continue to provide the same degree of support to Israel that is done so far. I mean, of course, President Biden has stated that, America's commitment to security of Israel is ironclad. But at the same time, he's really trying to pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu not to retaliate and therefore ignite a Middle East war in which the United States will have to get involved as a strategic partner of Israel, and therefore that will really make the war to take a global dimension.
That was Amin Sakal there, Adjunct Senior Fellow at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Thanks very much for your time this morning. And as we said, we're keeping a very close watch on any sort of response that we're getting to this weekend event. And the latest on this is what we're hearing from the US. It's just issued a readout of the call between Secretary of State Blinken and then also Jordanian foreign minister Blinken. But essentially what we're hearing here is that the US is saying it doesn't seek any sort of escalation, and also that the US says it's going to be continuing to support Israel's defense. So that is the readout from that call, as we said, between the foreign ministers of the US and also Jordan. But the market reaction so far, it's pretty muted, you have to say, really. Gold just fractionally high here. Earlier we did see spot gold spiking as much as 1.2%. But generally that flight to havens like the Japanese yen, like the dollar, it's fairly range-bound as we get in so far. So telling us perhaps investors are still seeing the risk of further escalation contained for now. But you can certainly turn to your Bloomberg for more insights on this. You can go to TLive Go to get commentary and analysis from Bloomberg's expert editors. We'll have plenty more to come on Daybreak Australia. This is Bloomberg.